And the first keynote speaker is someone who personally in my family is a hero in our household. Sophia, I'm not sure if you know, but my family left the Soviet Union back in the 1990s. They immigrated to Israel. And in our household, Natan Sharansky was the name of a hero. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our amazing speaker, Natan Sharansky, who was a spokesman for the human rights movement, a prisoner of Zion, a leader in the struggle for the right of Soviet Jews to immigrate to Israel. Mr. Sharansky was arrested on trumped-up charges. He was convicted in a Soviet court and served 9 years in the Gulag. Following massive public campaigns by the State of Israel, by world Jewry, and leaders of the free world, Mr. Sharansky was released in 1986, making Aliya on the very same day of his release. Mr. Sharansky dedicated his first years in Israel to assist Soviet immigrants with their arrival in Israel. In the 1990s, he established the Yisrael B'Aliyah party in order to accelerate the integration of Russian Jews. Mr. Sharansky received many awards for his work, including the Congressional Medal of Honor and the Presidential Medal of Freedom. He served as the chairman of the Jewish Agency for Israel. He then became the chairman of the Shlichut Institute and the chair of the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy. Mr. Natan Sharansky, it is a huge honor of students supporting Israel. And personally, I'm very excited to have you here with us today. How are you?
Good evening, dear friends. Good evening, good morning, wherever you are. It's great to see you, the fighters for our people and for our state. I'm glad we are meeting through Zoom because I got a cold, and I hope you will not catch it from me because of the Zoom. But I hope I'll be able to answer your questions. So, want me to present the case?
So, Mr. Sharansky.
Yeah, okay, please.
Mr. Sharansky, so our first question for the viewers and for the students, if you can just share with us your personal story and your fight for Zionism in the Soviet Union, Aliya story, and that whole background of yours, that it's very important for our viewers to know.
Well, okay, thank you for the question, but of course, it will take all our time. We will not come to the topic if I'll start telling all my story. Those who want to know more details can read my book, Fear No Evil, about interrogations and the prison experience, or recently published book, Never Alone, which I wrote together with Gil Troy, about 9 years in prison, 9 years in Israel government, 9 years in Jewish agency. In fact, about the dialogue between Israel and Jewish people. But let me really, in few phrases, to characterize those parts of my story which are relevant for our discussion. I was born in Ukraine, in Soviet Union, in the city of Donetsk, which today is, these days specifically, the center of the war between Ukraine and Russia. But then there was no war between Russia and Ukraine. Nobody could even think there can ever be conflict between Russia and Ukraine. It was all part of the Soviet Union. And there was one nation which really had problems, that was Jewish. You have to understand, I grew in the absolutely assimilated environment. It was forced assimilation, that was the policy of Soviet Union. So I had nothing Jewish, no Jewish tradition, no Jewish holidays, no Jewish faith, no Jewish book, no place to pray, no place to learn. But there was one Jewish thing, and that was anti-Semitism. A lot of anti-Semitism in the street, and all types of discrimination and restrictions by the Soviet authorities. And so there is nothing positive in being Jewish. You are born with this disease. It's written in the idea of your parents, Jew. So you're born with this disease, and you have to learn how to live with this. And parents explained that in order to live with this, you must be the best in physics or mathematics and chess and music. So that is the way of Jewish survival. So we have really no identity and the ambition to succeed. But we also have no freedom. And I always tell this story, so maybe many heard, but if somebody doesn't, I want to tell it again. I know exactly the moment when I became loyal Soviet citizen. I was 5 years old. Stalin died, and my father explains to me, to 5-year-old boy, that it is great day for us, for Jews. We Jews, we are in big danger, and miracle happened, Stalin died, but don't tell, remember all your life about it, but don't tell it to anybody, do what everybody does. The next day I go to the kindergarten and they cry with all the children about death of Stalin, and we sing songs about the son of all the people, Stalin. And I have no idea how many children are really crying and how many of them are crying because their father told them that that's what they have to do. So that is typical life of loyal Soviet citizen who knows that he says things, he reads, he speaks, he votes as he is supposed to do, and all this is a lie. But the truth can exist only for your family. And this double life is very uncomfortable. But will you fight for the right to be a free person? No, because there are no values in your life, except from the value to be the best in physics or mathematics. And so after 1967, when Israel entered our life in a very dramatic way, simply because everybody was talking about how it could be that Soviet Union was so humiliated by this small Zionist entity called Israel. And you understand that for people who love you and who hate you, you're connected to Israel because they all ask how you guys did it, how I did it, what I did. So that's when we started really learning about Israel, reading from the books which were brought by the tourists. And then you discover that with some switch in your mind, you can be part of this great history of your people, which starts not from Soviet Bolshevik Revolution in 1917, but from exodus from Egypt thousands of years ago. And this history continues. And all these Jews from all over the world who are coming and saying, your father is from Odessa and my father, grandfather is from Odessa. We are family, we want to help you. And you find out that there is a state which is ready to send airplanes to the end of the world, but to help you. So that's how you discover your identity, that you want to be part of it. And that's what gives you strength, and that will give you strength to start fighting for your rights of the other Jews, and then for freedom. That's how I became really activist and then spokesman of two movements, Jewish movement, and the human rights movement. And then we'll come to anti-Semitism. So your next question.
Yeah, and Mr. Sharansky, first of all, thank you so much. It's truly inspiring. And our next question to you, it's why, to your opinion, anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism? Because I'll give you three specific examples. At the University of Minnesota, there was a referendum to adopt the higher definition of anti-Semitism. And one of the biggest arguments by SJP is that anti-Zionism does not equal anti-Semitism and that Judaism does not equal Zionism. Then at the University of Florida, we sent an event hosted by SJP, Zionism and Bolshevism, and how Zionism was an imperialistic thing and it didn't let Bolshevism and communism to succeed. So to someone that spent 9 years in a Soviet Gulag and someone that grew up in the Soviet Union, what do you tell to those students? Like, to your opinion, why are they so wrong? Like, where is the detachment and why is anti-Zionism is a form of anti-Semitism?
Okay. And here, that's a very important question not only for general organization, but also for Jews to understand. And that was the reason how we started thinking about this definition. But I have to say that for those who lived in the Soviet Union, it was obvious. In Soviet Union, you know practically nothing about Zionism, about Israel, you know very little about your Jewishness, but you know when there is campaign starts in the press that Zionist agents, the famous Soviet actor, Mikhails, it appears that he's a Zionist agent. Everybody knows that that's the beginning of the campaign of persecuting of thousands of Jews. And anti-Semitism is not permitted. But when the cartoons with the Israeli soldier, which simply everybody understands, every neighbor, every non-Jewish neighbor understands this cartoon, that is a Jew, that the classical Jew with big nose and with drinking blood of his victims. And when in the Soviet press these cartoons are published, everybody knows that that's against Jews. Anti-Semites know and Jews know. So in Soviet Union, Soviet propaganda, in the anti-Semitic campaign which Stalin started, and then, thanks God, he was planning massive evacuation of Jews from big cities on Pesach, but on Purim, he had an attack, a stroke, died. But so for everybody, though, it was clear that it's all connected. Here I'm coming to the free world, and you want to believe that anti-Semitism is something which belongs to the Soviet dictatorship, and definitely this new anti-Semitism of hatred of Israel. And then in the beginning, approximately 20 years ago, the second Intifada, we in Israel are in the middle of the struggle. I'm in the government, and we have to take very difficult decisions how to stop these terrorist attacks, which are killing every day dozens of our citizens. And we feel it's soon after 9/11, we are standing on the line defending all the free world. And this time begins big campaign, which I then saw. I made a tour in American campuses in 2003. Big campaign against Israel and how people are embarrassed because Israel is accused in war crimes. And there is a cartoon in Guardian, in British newspaper, where Prime Minister Sharon is eating Palestinian kids, typical face of classical anti-Semitic cartoon. And the blood is dropping from his mouth. And they're telling, look, it's classical anti-Semitism. And we appeal to this cartoonist in The Guardian, and he's really angry. He says, how can you even think that I'm anti-Semite? And not only, and look, compare this cartoon with all the classical cartoons against Jews. And what it is that Palestinian kids are eaten by Prime Minister of Israel, don't you know what? And their blood is on his hands and from his mouth. It's simply inviting for anti-Semitic comments. And then not only he didn't cancel his cartoon, this cartoon was given by British Society, John's the best in the year, and European Union of Cartoonists gave it the best cartoon of the year. And just at the same time, one of the leaders from Western Europe, I don't know, intellectuals, came to Israel and said, I visited Palestinian refugee camp. That's Auschwitz of today. I was many times in the Palestinian refugee camp. I think it's absolutely unacceptable that fifth generation of Palestinians live in these refugee camps. And we can discuss who has to be blamed for this. But what it has to do, even if you think that Israel has to be blamed for it, and it isn't, but even if you think what it has to do with Auschwitz, I don't have to even to start explaining. And then I say, that is anti-Semitism. And there are many leaders in Europe saying, no, not how you can say, how can you accuse us in anti-Semitism? Anti-Semitism doesn't exist in Europe after Holocaust. It's absolutely impossible. We are all fighting it. But that's the impression of this person. And so there were many examples like this. And then I came with my 3D proposal. I said, look, what are the tools which anti-Semitism was using for 1,000 years against Jews? First of all, demonization. As Sartre said, the Jew is the closest, for anti-Semite, Jew is the closest to Satan. And they were drawn as Satan. And of course, they were poisoning the wells, they were drinking the blood of the babies, and so on. So all types of demonization. What is demonization? When absolutely disconnected with any proofs, you don't have to prove anything. You simply declare that they are part of a mystical satanic sect, and as a result, they have a plot against the world, individually and other people. So demonization was a powerful tool. Another powerful tool was delegitimization. Jewish religion was cancelled when Christianity came. It was not yet replacing theory, you know. And Stalin wrote a big article in 1916 that there were 150 nations in the Russian Empire, but only about one. He wrote an article, Why Jews Are Not a Nation, and so on and so on. So the dialogue of our legitimacy as a people or our legitimacy as a religion, that's another tool. And double standard. There are special laws in Russia, in Germany, in the Middle East, Middle Ages, Europe, special laws for Jews, which are not applied to anybody else. Clear double standard. And in Soviet Union, but there was no special laws, there was unofficial double standard for getting to the university and many other things. So what I'm saying, if the same tools, demonization, double standard, or delegitimation are applied now to biggest Jewish institution, which we have, Jewish state, that is the same antisemitism. When I proposed 3D, I could find different combinations. I said, look, if you go to the 3D film, to 3D cinema, and watch 3D film, if you will not put special spectacles, you will not understand what you see. But the moment you put the spectacles, you understand that is spade, that is house, and that is a man. And so there is criticism, a lot of criticism of Israel. And there is debate, legitimate, not legitimate, anti-Semitism, not anti-Semitism. Just now we have another declaration why criticism of Israel is not anti-Semitism. So in Israel, everybody criticizes the Israeli government if he or she wants to have political future. Where it becomes anti-Semitic, I say, put on 3D glasses and see if there is demonization, if there is double standard, if there is delegitimization. And I have to say it took time. And then it was, in fact, Joschka Fischer, the foreign minister of Germany, who himself made a career from the left-wing terrorist to the leader of Green Party that became foreign minister. And being on the left, he was a great friend of Israel and supported my proposal about this definition. And at the Berlin conference on anti-Semitism, he gave me an opportunity to present it fully. And then it started, it got support of State Department and so on. Later, 10 years, if you look now at the international definitions that you're talking about, our definition, all these examples which are given there, they are all about demonization, delegitimization, double standard. And that's why those who are saying that there is nothing in common between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, I would say theoretically there can be a person who is anti-Zionist and he is not anti-Semite. Of course there can be. And it is possible to fight against Zionism and not to be anti-Semitic. But look, are you really using the language? Or what is the aim behind your criticism? Do you want to destroy the state of Israel? Don't forget, Barghouti, the founder, the one who launched BDS, he makes it very open, very clear that he believes that Israel as a state is illegitimate. Is there clear demonization of Israel? Is there clear double standard which is applied to this country is not applied to the other country? If yes, that is anti-Semitism.
Well, Mr. Sharansky, thank you very, very much. And I actually want to mention that back in 2012, when student support in Israel was started at the University of Minnesota, one of the reasons to why we started was when we were walking down the university, and there was a big poster at the SJP table with a hand funneling American dollars into almost like a bowl of blood with Palestinian children in it, and the funnel had a Jewish star on it. Not an Israeli flag, just a simple Jewish star. And when we saw it as Israelis, as Jewish, for us, we realized right away, this flyer here is anti-Semitic. This is a classic example of anti-Semitism. And Sophia, I know that you'll lead us into the next few questions here.
Yeah, absolutely. I know, Mr. Sharansky, you're a huge hero of mine and to my family. I actually passed the 3Ds when I was in Student Supporting Israel as a student on my campus at Kent State University. And I'm wondering what you think about adopting the 3Ds into student governments and your opinion on how students should get this adopted and how they should defend themselves, because we see a lot of students today struggle with utilizing the 3Ds in their student governments. And a lot of times non-Jews in student government don't really understand the importance of the connection between the 3Ds and anti-Semitism.
Well, first of all, Aliya, that our problem was with non-Jews. Our problem, first of all, is with Jews. Jews who are embarrassed that they will be accused. They support policy of Israel, and that's why they can say that that's anti-Semitism. But what is really needed? Very simple formulas, and that's why I wanted to bring it to something that can be understood by everybody. It's simply cartoons, or you. Today, it's very popular to say Israel, it is apartheid state, and why, how it is demonstrated on the campuses. There is anti-apartheid week, and there is big wall in the center of the campus, and that is what Palestinians are suffering. That's separating the Arabs have to live on this side of the wall, and Jews are on this side. And of course, it's absolute lie. And if you want to criticize this anti-terrorist wall, which checks whether people who are coming have weapons in their hands or explosives, okay, you can criticize whether it is whether there are enough checkpoints, whether conditions are good or not. We have a lot of discussion about it in Israel. Our Attorney General, when I was in the government, Eli Rubinstein went for 2 weeks to the army to serve at the checkpoint in order himself to see whether really there are some violations of human rights or not. But nobody is discussing it. Nobody is interested in discussing. I tried many times in the campus to say, you know what? You say apartheid. I'm a friend of Mandela. I was their international observer of the elections. I know what apartheid means. Let's discuss with you for a few minutes. And those who are demonstrating against us, their answer is, we are not going to discuss it with you. We simply demand boycott Israel. So the moment we bring it to this very simple logic, it becomes clear that those who want to criticize Israel, they can criticize, but then they don't need to use demonization. This, whether you say it is neo-Nazi state or whether you say it's apartheid state, it's all demonization because there are no facts behind it. So you really have to make, to appeal to the logic. Jews, even those Jews who are doubtful or who are afraid or who are embarrassed, who are afraid that it's bad for their career, but usually Jews are very good in logic. So, and our opponents, as a rule, are shouting slogans, but are not ready to be involved in any serious logical discussion.
Oh,
And
for God's
such
sake.
simple definitions in order to have logical explanation or logical debate with those who agree with us and with those who disagree. I have to say, there is no problem in having debate about the policy of Israeli government. We in Israel every day have everybody involved in this debate. But the clear definition, what are the borders when it becomes anti-Semitism, will help the people to feel free in criticizing Israel without crossing these lines. And then criticize, please. But for this, you must be ready to be involved in serious debate. And as a rule, our opponents who simply look for our destruction are not ready to be involved in such dialogue.
Thank you so much. And I know you touched briefly on this, but what would you say about the Jews specifically who engage in the 3 Ds and come off as anti-Semitic? How would you address that situation?
Well, I'm not sure I got your question, but let me maybe rephrase it a little bit.
Let me rephrase. Yeah, go ahead. Rephrase it.
Look, we are really in a very unique situation now. Though anti-Semitism is the most common thing which accompanies us for 1,000 years. But what was usual that anti-Semitism always united us. When there was blood libel in Damascus, all the Jewish world, religious and secular and socialists and capitalists, everybody was united. When there was Dreyfus trial or the Baileys in Russia, or many other famous anti-Semitic cases, usually Jews understood that's a problem, that's also against us. we have to speak in one voice. Today, we have this unusual situation where because there exists the state of Israel, and because there exists big Jewish community in diaspora, when there is anti-Semitism on the left, which is mainly directed against Israel, and there is anti-Semitism on the right, which is mainly directed against Jews. For the people who are, for many Jews, it's difficult to recognize that anti-Semitism is in their camp. Because after all, we want that people on the left will fight anti-Semitism on the left. We want that people on the right will fight anti-Semitism on the right. There is, what will happen if people on the left will say, oh, that is only the problem. It's not our problem, it's problem on the right, because they explain that because on the right, there are those who are coming and killing people in Pittsburgh and other places. And on the left, it's only over-energized students who are shouting some slogans. But people on the right will say, no, there's a real BDS movement. There is finances behind it. There is organizations behind there is political pressure behind it. All this anti-Semitism on the right is lonely wolves. There is nothing behind it. And we should not accept this, we should not accept this, because it is very important that we will speak in one voice. And that's why, yes, it is very important to be able to understand while those who went to kill Jews in Pittsburgh, they're against Israel. And why those who are demanding boycott of Israel, they're against Jews. And so today it is much more difficult to be united around anti-Semitism when there are different faces of anti-Semitism and just growing at the same time. But that's why it is so important again and again to say to people on the left or the right, try to make this connection. See, it is so obvious, but you start seeing how one hatred towards Jews as individuals turns into hatred towards Jews as a religion and turns into the hatred of Jewish state and vice versa.
Mr. Sharansky, before we ask the last two questions, something that we would like to touch on. It has been 30 years since the Soviet Jewry mostly left the Soviet Union. Many of them, of course, over 1.5 million people ended up in Israel, and many of them also ended up in North America. And even now on college campuses, we see that the descendants, the kids of those Soviet Jews who now speak Hebrew, who speak English, are also some of the biggest fighters for the cause of against anti-Semitism and against anti-Zionism on our campuses. What would you like to tell those young students, those descendants of the Soviet Jews who lived for over 100 years behind the Iron Curtain in their fight today, which is a different fight, but is also an important one?
Well, I want to say two things. First of all, each time when I'm speaking to the audiences of Russian speakers, those who came from the Soviet Union, or those whose parents came, I remind them how, in fact, Israeli government was very much against the phenomena that Soviet Jews go not to Israel, but to any other country. And I was one of those few refuseniks who refused to support the policy of Israel government, because it said, we are Zionists, but we want that everybody will have freedom of choice. And the last thing which we want that people who are coming to Israel will feel that they are forced to come and not free choice. Why I'm telling it? Because the main argument which Israeli ministers then 30 years ago were telling to me then, but don't you understand that in America they will disappear? They as Jews will disappear. Here they will not be assimilated, they will be assimilated. So I always say it is for you and for me, for those who didn't agree then with the policy of Israel government, to prove that you are not going to disappear, that you are going to be part of Jewish people. That's on the level of my request, if you want. Now, but the other thing which I want to say, you are in a unique position because you, or at least your parents, lived in the Soviet Union and know very well the level of the hatred of the dictatorships towards Israel, and how important for us, for Jewish survival, for our identity is Israel. If there was no Israel, we will disappear in Soviet Union. Through Israel, we discovered there is. So the feeling of this identity, the feeling of connection to Israel as part of your identity is much stronger, for good or for bad, among those whose first language was Russian. And I will say them, you must be the bridge. Look, unfortunately, there are many Jews in diaspora who lived in such good conditions all their life, who didn't know anything but absolute freedom, and who don't appreciate how important this connection to Israel is for Jewish diaspora. For those who are going to live in the diaspora, want to stay Jewish. And so you do understand, you do feel. So you're a very important bridge between Israel and American Jewry.
Oh, yeah, Mr. Sharansky, thank you very much for that. And some strong answers. I'll say that about 10 years ago, I met you at an event that you came to a speaker to speak in a synagogue. I'm sure that you probably don't remember, and we had a picture together. And I ran to you as an 18-year-old, very excited, Mr. Sharansky, can we please take a picture? And 10 years later, interviewing you personally, it's almost like closing in a circle. And it makes me very happy, and I'm very thankful for your lecture today, for your kind and wise words to our students, and of course to the Israel Campus Coalition that helped us to make this happen. So, Mr. Sharansky, thank you. And Sophia, anything to Mr. Sharansky as well?
It's just a dream of mine as well to speak with you one-on-one. I also had a similar story. I met you at the Tikva Fund conference actually a few years ago, and you're so inspiring to me and, again, my family, and it's such an honor to be interviewing you as well.
Thank you, and thank you for your work. Your work is extremely important. It's a really critical moment. Shall we have a response to anti-Semitism as one people? And that's what you're doing. Thank you.
Thank
Have
you.
a good night.
Thank you.
So now, as we keep moving with our conference, and truly that was inspiring. You know, I remember running, Mr. Sharansky, can we please take a picture before you leave? And we're interviewing now for our students, for students supporting Israel, at truly closing of a circle. And some of the things that I wrote here, that a quote that I really like, that Mr. Sharansky said, that for the Soviet Jews, when they discovered Israel, they almost like came alive again, because without Israel, the Judaism would disappear. And this is true today. Without Israel, many people's Judaism will probably disappear, and Israel keeps it going. Only lately, the Bureau of Statistics in Israel published some numbers, and it showed that while the numbers of Jewish people in Israel keeps on growing, the numbers of Jewish people in the other communities worldwide keeps on decreasing, okay, for many different reasons. We're not going to get into them right now, but Israel keeps the Jewish community vibrant, and as a community that was here for 2,000 years, it is our generation's challenge and mission to keep us going for 2,000 more and forever, hopefully.
Absolutely. Absolutely.